With hindsight, do you think that this shouldn't have been pursued, that the suspension should have just been left to continue?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the Prime Minister, and in your opening remarks, you talked about today's summit and youth and, of course, climate is incredibly important, and it's Youth and Education Day here in Glasgow. But the Prime Minister has always been very clear that paid lobbying is not allowed. I think the mistake, which to your point, to your question, is the conflation of creating a fairer system with the right of appeal for parliamentarians to be able to put forward effectively, an appeal process, and then conflating that with a particular case of Owen Paterson was a mistake. And I think the Leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg, came to the House yesterday. Upon reflection, yes, it was a mistake, and I think it was right to come back very quickly to the House and say, look, we need to separate those two things out. We should work on a cross-party basis to create a fairer system. I think that's a good thing, and my appeal to my fellow parliamentarians from all parties is, look, let's come together and create a better system with the right of appeal. And it was right to separate the two things out. That was the mistake, and I think it was right to reflect and return to Parliament and correct that.
Do you accept, then, that Owen Paterson did something wrong?
Well, I think, look, the Commissioner had investigated and had come back on the investigation around what Owen Paterson was doing in terms of his work for two companies. That is, as I said to you, the Prime Minister has always been clear that paid lobbying is wrong, and we need to separate those two things out. As I say, the thing to focus on is not this particular case, but to focus on creating a fairer system with the right of appeal for all parliamentarians.
But you voted for this change, didn't you? I mean, obviously there was the whip involved in this, but we know an awful lot of your colleagues on the back benches were really, really uncomfortable with this. Why did you feel the need to vote for it?
Well, again, I would say to your viewers that I take collective responsibility. I'm a Secretary of State, a cabinet member in this government, and we voted because I thought actually improving the system and introducing a right of appeal, as you would have in many sectors of the economy, in many professions, people have a right of appeal. I think your viewers would understand there's a fairness argument here. But upon reflection, I do think it's a mistake to have conflated that with a specific issue around the investigation into Owen Paterson, and I think it was right that we reflected on that, and the Leader of the House came back to the House yesterday and basically said as much, that it was a mistake and we need to separate those two things out, and I hope we'll be able to return with proposals and have a cross-party agreement as to how we improve the system to introduce a right of appeal into it.
I mean, how much of this change of heart and this 19-hour later U-turn from number 10 on this, you say it was because you didn't want to conflate the issues, but how much of that was driven by the fact that Mr Paterson told our deputy political editor he'd do it again?
Well, look, I don't want to comment on anything that, Owen Paterson said on interviews, other than to say the Prime Minister made a very clear statement recognising Owen Paterson's 24 years of service, recognising that, let's not forget, there is a family here that have just lost a mother and a wife who he and his family were devoted to, and you need a bit of compassion in our hearts as well. But in saying that, the mistake that I think we want to correct is to separate that out, and this particular case, from what I think is the right thing to do and the fair thing, and for Parliament to concentrate on, is to get our appeals process in place for all parliamentarians in the future.
Well, I mean, Mr Paterson wants some compassion, doesn't he? When he's resigned, he said he stepped down to escape the cruel world of politics. I mean, a cruel world that, along with his lobbying, it was netting him about 200 or very nearly 200 grand a year. I don't think the public's going to be overly sympathetic, are they? And you need to bear that in mind.
Well, I think the public will make their own judgment on this. All I would say is that it's worth remembering that there is a family here concerned who've just lost a mother. There are children and, of course, Owen himself. But the public will make up their own mind on this. I think the priority has to be now for us, and I hope I can appeal to my colleagues across the House, let's shed our political differences aside. Let's not play politics with this. Let's get the system right, because the system does need a right of appeal, and that's the fairest thing to do. And that's what I think Andrea Leadsom was trying to achieve with her amendment. Now, that didn't work. I think it was right for us to come back to Parliament and for the Leader of the House to say, look, we think we made a mistake by conflating the two things in one. And I think now is the time to come together and just deal with the process to which we hold ourselves to account.
Forgive me, though. I mean, this has been an absolute shambles in terms of management, hasn't it, from number 10 down? I mean, even with, one of your colleagues, Matt Chorley, saying on Twitter, even if voters forget this shambles, Tory MPs won't. Scores of them held their nose, had arms twisted, faced abuse online and in postbags, and now Boris Johnson has made them look like idiots. They'll remember that the next time there's a rebellion.
Well, as I say, look, the important thing is for all parliamentarians on all sides now to focus on what is truly material. What is material is, and I've spoken to the Speaker of the House, and I think he agrees with me on this, what's material is to maintain confidence in the processes and the system that we have in place and improve it, if we can, through a right of appeal. That's something that's worth working on. That's something that's worth putting energy into, rather than putting. I'd rather focus on that than waste my energy and time on sort of tit for tat or being angry.
OK, well, what about apologising then to someone like Catherine Stone? Because, I mean, there are questions as to whether the Conservative Party has made her position untenable through no fault of her own, actually. But Kwasi Kwarteng said yesterday she now needs to decide her position. I mean, for what? For doing her job?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to remind all parliamentarians and, of course, your viewers, the country at large, that Catherine Stone, the Commissioner, works for the House, for Parliament, for the legislature. And I think it's only right that I echo the words of the Speaker by saying, actually, it is up to the House how the Commissioner and the procedures actually are delivered. And I think that's the important thing to remember in this. And that's what I would leave it. I was hoping we were also going to talk about youth and education day to day at COP26, but happy to continue talking about the procedures of Parliament, if that's what you'd like to do.
Yeah, we will talk about the youth in just a second, but one final point on this then. There is an acceptance, is there, from what you say, that Kwasi Kwarteng did actually speak out of turn yesterday? Well,
as I say, it's important that to remember, and I don't think Kwasi was saying anything different, that actually Catherine Stone, the Commissioner, has a responsibility to the legislature, to the House of Commons, and the Speaker was absolutely right in reminding all of us that that is the correct thing to do. Look, I'm happy to continue talking about this, but I hope we can also talk about what I'm launching today, which is our sustainability and climate change strategy, which will, I hope, support teachers to deliver, evidence-led education through STEM science subjects, through geography, and, of course, through citizenship to our students, including the primary model science curriculum at primary school as well. And, of course, we're launching a national education park. If you take all our schools, nurseries, colleges and universities, they're about the size of 2 Birmingham cities of parkland and land that we think we can create a sort of a virtual coming together of all of that parkland to teach young people about biodiversity, about spatial planning, about geospatial mapping. All these things are incredibly exciting, and it's worth just, I hope, leaning into youth and climate day today.